Unit 3, Medical Treatment. In this unit, we're going to have 3 lessons covering the various medical treatments associated with ADHD. When I say medical treatments, really what I'm talking about here is medication. So we're going to start out with this first lesson that covers sort of an introduction of medication use in ADHD. Lesson 8 is going to cover the most common medications used for ADHD, which includes the stimulant medications. And then lesson 9 is going to be more specific to non-stimulant medications, some of the newer medications used in the treatment of ADHD. So hopefully this will give you some good information that you can use as you're making some decisions regarding treatment for your child. So let's start here with lesson 7, Introduction to Medications. So we should start out the unit with a quick overview of medications and their use with ADHD. Although Unit 4 is going to cover a variety of alternative treatment methods, I certainly don't want to give you the impression that medication should be avoided at all costs. Medication has a place, and sometimes a very important place in the treatment of ADHD. So to deny its use would be no different than the converse of assuming that medication is the only treatment for ADHD. In fact, as we'll talk about again in a little bit, a combination of medication and non-medication treatment is the most ideal scenario. So first, there are 2 broad categories of medications used for ADHD, stimulant and the others. They refer to the others ingeniously, I guess, as the non-stimulants. So let's begin with the stimulants. I'm going to spend an entire lesson on stimulants. Lesson 8 is going to cover the background and some of the other things associated with stimulant medication. And then, of course, as I mentioned already, lesson 9 is going to cover the other medications or the non-stimulants. And as you will see, only some of the non-stimulant medications are really even FDA approved for ADHD, though they're very commonly used. But first, let's talk about why medications are used in the first place. As you learned in lesson 2, there is a biological basis for ADHD. Multiple regions of the brain are implicated in the expression and severity of ADHD symptoms. Though it is true that the relationship between brain function and specific behaviors are still somewhat theoretical, evidence continues to mount supporting the notion that there is a direct relationship between the two. You have likely heard from others, either online or in books, that the biological basis of ADHD is theoretical. The most likely source of this comes from those who oppose the use of medication. From their perspective, they see that there really isn't a firm, diagnostic, measurable, predictable link between brain function and behavior. And they're correct. This causal link hasn't been proven. But let's consider what that means. From a scientific research perspective, to identify a causal link, we would need to look at a non-ADHD child's brain, examine it, and then adjust it so that the specific regions we believe are implicated with ADHD do not function appropriately. If we then see ADHD symptoms once we manipulate that child's brain, we can say, yes, there's a causal link. These behaviors were not present before. We caused damage or did some insult to that region of the brain. It resulted in ADHD symptoms, so therefore there is a causal link between damage to this particular region of the brain or dysfunction in this particular area of the brain and the ADHD symptoms. Now, I don't know how many parents would volunteer their children for such an experiment. Not only that, we would need hundreds, if not thousands, of children to demonstrate a true causal link and to be able to have confidence and say, yes, in fact, there is this causal link. So I don't think that there's going to be a lot of people lining up for that study. So this leaves us with having to compare children with ADHD to those without ADHD. Now, there are some complications with that, with those types of procedures. The first is that we have to aggregate data. That means that we have to combine all of the data together. So we take all of the kids with ADHD, put their data together, take all the kids without ADHD, put their data together, and compare the two. This kind of research does not look at the individual, it looks at this aggregated data. And so it loses some meaning because we're looking at overall differences. And so while there may be overall differences between the ADHD group from the non-ADHD group, it doesn't necessarily guarantee that there's any particular difference in the individual. One ADHD child may resemble that suggested by the aggregated data, and another may not. They may present in a different way. So it is critical that we don't try to lump all children with ADHD and non-ADHD together into the same basket, because there are some differences. This leads me to the main problems in the field of medicine. And that is, in medicine, we tend to look for the one true magic pill, like the One Ring from Tolkien's novels. In medicine, we hope to find the one pill to rule them all, the one pill that will address all of the symptoms and causes of a particular disorder, disease, or condition. The reality, though, is that it is rare that there is one cause, one etiology for a particular disorder, disease, or condition. Instead, what we have learned from the emerging field of functional medicine is that there are likely multiple etiologies, and that we should be looking at many factors that could be contributing to a particular condition. In the case of ADHD research, that aggregated data that I was talking about earlier, suggests that some individuals with ADHD have functional deficits in one region of the brain, such as the frontal lobe, while others have problems and deficits in other brain regions, such as the reticular formation. Again, we'll talk much more about that in our PYAC YouTube channel, so you can go there and you can learn much more about the particular brain regions if that's of interest to you. But for here, it's simply important that you understand that different brain regions may be implicated in different people with ADHD. Now, unfortunately, this leads us to the place where medical research stops and leaves us with the impression that the only treatment for ADHD are medications that stimulate these underperforming regions of the brain. However, some researchers have ventured away from stimulants and explored other non-stimulant medications that focus on other neurotransmitters besides the ones implicated with stimulant medications. Those neurotransmitters with stimulant medications are called dopamine and norepinephrine. We're now looking at other neurotransmitters such as serotonin and looking at the relationship between ADHD symptoms and these other neurochemicals. We're going to review much more of that in the next two lessons. A final note. The next two lessons will focus on the medical treatments of ADHD, stimulant medications, and non-stimulant medications, respectively. But as I mentioned a moment ago, it is critical that we expand our perception of ADHD and factors that influence the symptoms. While the brain, including the neurotransmitters, is one possible factor implicated in ADHD, there are many others. I recently heard a very nice metaphor to illustrate this point. Imagine you have a home and there are dozens of holes in the roof. We want to plug those holes, and so medication is one tool to plug a hole. The problem is that the medication only plugs one or two holes, but there are still many, many more. What do we do about those other holes? And that's where Unit 4 comes in. Unit 4 is going to be dedicated to those other holes, dedicated to other treatments that we still have to do. Even if the child's on medication, we still have to do these other things to make sure that our children grow up to develop the skills that they need to be successful. Okay? So I hope that's a good foundation for you as we talk about the purposes of medication and why medications are important. The next two lessons are going to go into more detail with them. If you have questions, as always, please write to us in the comments or ask any questions that you might have. We'll see you next time in Lesson 8.